That night, my son told me to leave the dinner table because I refused to sign the transfer papers for the company. He said, "You just don't understand how the world works anymore." I didn't argue. I simply gathered my plate and walked away. The next morning, at exactly 7:32 a.m., my lawyer said one sentence and the whole house fell silent. "My name is Harold Bennett, 68, founder of Bennett Freight and Storage, LLC. I live with my son Clayton, his wife Vanessa, and my 10-year-old grandson Noah. And this is my story." That night when my son told me to leave the table, it wasn't in anger. There was no shouting, no slammed fists, just a single line, clean and cold, slicing through the air like a knife across wood. The dining room felt heavy. The clink of silverware on porcelain, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the slow tick of the clock, every sound seemed too loud. On the table, the bottle of wine I'd bought in 2018 stood unopened like a silent witness. Clayton lifted his eyes. 38 years old, his face drawn tight. The collar of his shirt looked too small, or maybe it was pride that was choking him. Across from him, Vanessa angled her phone toward the roast, adjusting the plate for better lighting. She smiled without warmth, her screen glowing against her face. Noah hummed along with a TV jingle drifting in from the living room, his fork chasing mashed potatoes across the plate. Then Clayton spoke. "We need to talk." I knew that tone. It wasn't the voice of the boy who once begged me to take him to Braves games. It was the voice of a man in debt, clinging to pride and trying to save himself by selling the only thing I had left. I asked quietly what was so urgent it had to interrupt dinner. He laced his fingers together. "I talked to New Haven Capital. They'll give us one more chance if the company's ownership is transferred. They need your signature this week." I looked at him, then at Vanessa. She didn't even look up, just tapped her screen and sent the photo. "I said I gave you control 3 years ago, Clayton. I haven't interfered since." He shot back. "You still own it, Dad. No one wants to invest in a company held by someone who's already retired. And you think selling it will save it?" I asked. He raised his voice. "It's the only way. If you care about me, sign the papers." I leaned back, feeling the chair creak beneath me. For a moment, I heard nothing but the clock counting down time we'd never get back. I remembered Ellie, my wife, once telling me that when people start putting money above gratitude, they end up losing both. I said, "You can run the company, but ownership, that's another matter." Vanessa looked up, then smiling a little too easily. "You have to understand, Mr. Bennett. Times have changed. The name Bennett isn't just trucks and warehouses anymore, it's a brand. Clayton's taking it to the next level." I didn't answer, but my silence only pushed him further. He slammed his hand against the table. The glasses rattled. Noah flinched. "If you won't sign, then you don't belong at this table." Everything inside me went still. I looked at my son, the man I once carried on my shoulders, the boy I sold my first truck to put through college. I asked, "What did you just say?" He didn't look away. I said, "If you don't trust me, then you're no longer part of this family's decisions." Vanessa froze, her smile fading. Noah dropped his spoon, the sound small but sharp against the wood floor. I stood. The chair groaned like it was tired of holding all that unspoken history. I gathered my plate, walked to the sink. No one spoke. The faucet hissed water hitting porcelain, the overhead light gleaming off cold steel. Behind me, I heard the sound of Clayton pouring more wine, Vanessa adjusting the tablecloth, Noah's uneven breath. I stepped outside. The night air over Savannah was warm, carrying the smell of salt and pine. My hands looked older under the porch light, veins raised, skin roughened by sun and work. The river lay quiet below, reflecting the harbor lights in a slow shimmer. I'd poured 30 years of my life into that company, into that family, only to be told to leave the table because I wouldn't sign it away. From inside, I heard laughter. Not the kind that heals, but the kind that cuts. I wondered when it became so easy to forget who built the ground they stood on. A freighter rumbled past its horn low and long like the echo of a memory. I thought of the nights I took Clayton with me on runs, how his small hands gripped the steering wheel as I told him every engine sound was a promise. He used to laugh, eyes bright, swearing he'd drive beside me forever. Now that promise was nothing but wind over water. I sat on the porch chair, the wood cool beneath my palms. I didn't feel angry, just hollow. Not from what was said, but from realizing that in my own home my voice no longer mattered. Inside, life went on. The scrape of a chair, the clink of silverware, Vanessa's low voice lost in the hum of the TV. Noah said something I couldn't catch, then fell quiet. I knew I wouldn't forget this night. Not for the words, but for the moment I understood that respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and it can disappear the moment you stop standing up for it. I took a deep breath, tasting river air and damp wood. Then I stood. The night over Savannah stretched wide and endless, the river whispering below. Something had ended, but something else had just begun, quiet and steady like the current moving beneath my feet. I stepped into the house just before 10. The kitchen light was still on, but the voices were gone. The dining table stood bare, only a few crumbs, a half-finished glass of wine, and the faint echo of something that used to be a family. I washed my hands under the faucet, the cold water running over fingers that trembled slightly. Then I turned off the light. Darkness folded over the room, leaving only the moonlight coming through the window, falling across the table where I'd once sat. In my bedroom, the wooden door creaked softly as I pushed it open. The faint smell of old paint still lingered. On the nightstand, a photograph of Ellie waited for me. I picked it up. The silver frame had dulled with time. Ellie was wearing her pale blue dress, standing on the Savannah pier, her hair caught mid-motion by the wind. Her smile was so bright, I could almost hear it. That was 2015, a spring, thick with sunlight, back when the company still felt like pride, not burden. Beside her stood our first truck, Bennett Freight's red workhorse wheels streaked with mud. I remembered buying that truck old and broken, fixing it over 3 nights straight. Ellie brought me coffee each time, saying I was building a dream with my bare hands. I sat on the edge of the bed. The lamplight fell across the photo, and for a second I could hear her voice in the room. When respect disappears, silence is the only answer. She said that once the year we lost our biggest contract. I'd lashed out at everyone but Ellie, only told me to be still, to let time teach what words couldn't. Now that sentence came back to me like she had left it here for this very night. I sighed, set the photo down, and opened my laptop. The screen flared white in the dim room. A new email blinked in my inbox. No sender's name, just a strange address. Subject line, check the Bennett Trust files. The message was one line. You should review the Bennett Trust. Someone's moving assets without your consent. I froze. The veins in my neck pulsed hard. Someone knew enough to call it by its real name. I thought of Sarah Langdon, my accountant of 12 years. She knew every number, every signature. She left 2 years ago when Clayton began streamlining staff. Sarah never raised her voice, just sent me a handwritten thank you card. The tone of that email, it felt like her. I closed the laptop and stood still. The night wind slipped through the window frame, carrying the damp scent of the river. I went downstairs and switched on the dim light in the garage. Everything was where it had always been. The old Ford pickup rested in the corner, my toolbox stacked beside the stairs. On the wooden shelf sat a row of boxes I'd brought home after retirement. Dust blanketed them thinly. When I touched one, it rose in a small golden cloud under the light. I pulled the boxes out one by one: freight contracts, insurance forms, vehicle titles, until I found it. A thick envelope sealed with red wax. Across the front, in my own handwriting, Bennett Revocable Trust, 2018. My fingertips brushed the seal. The wax was cool, almost cold enough to sting. That was the document Richard Calloway and I had drafted 7 years ago, right after Ellie passed. I'd wanted to protect the company from risk, from greed, maybe even from the mistakes of my own blood. I remembered Richard's words as we signed the papers. What you've built will only belong to those who know how to respect it. I nodded back then, not knowing how prophetic that sentence would become. I laid the envelope on the workbench and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled upward, thick and gray against the yellow light. I hadn't smoked in 10 years, not since Ellie died, but tonight I needed something to keep my hands from shaking. The taste was harsher than I remembered. Clayton's face came to mind. If that email was true, he was trying to move the company's assets without my approval. Did he even know this trust existed? Probably not. When Ellie died, I sealed this envelope myself, told only Richard, and locked it away in these boxes. I'd wanted to wait until Clayton was ready, until I saw in his eyes the steadiness needed to carry the weight of a legacy. But maybe that day would never come. I exhaled. Smoke drifted toward the window pane, curling against the reflection of the river. The paper on the bench stirred slightly under the draft, as if someone had just sighed beside me. I stubbed out the cigarette and opened the garage door. Outside, the night was moonless. Only a scatter of dock lights glimmered along the water's edge. A lone owl called from somewhere upriver, then fell silent. The air held its breath. I stood there for a long moment, just me, the smoke, and the sealed envelope. Ellie's voice came back again, steady and calm. Respect is the last thread holding people together. Once it breaks, everything else is just noise. Tonight, I'd heard that thread snap. And now, looking at the wax seal under the flickering light, I knew what I had to do. Something Ellie would have understood completely. Not out of anger, out of duty. I rested my hand on the edge of the envelope. It felt like holding my own past. I didn't open it, not yet. I didn't need to. Just seeing it there was enough to remind me that every answer I needed was inside. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the paper's edge. The golden light trembled, washing over my face, and the deep lines etched around my eyes. I put out the cigarette, switched off the light. The garage fell quiet. The envelope lay still, sealed, but somehow alive, breathing, with the weight of everything left unsaid. And I knew when morning came I would have to face what was left of my family. The morning light slipped through the worn blinds of the garage, cutting pale stripes across the wooden workbench where I'd left the envelope overnight. I brewed a pot of coffee, the bitter warmth filling the air, and sat down. My hands found the red wax seal edges frayed, a trace of ash from last night still clinging to the table. I took a long breath, steady, then broke the seal. Inside lay a thick stack of papers, the pages yellowed by time, but the ink still sharp. Across the top in my handwriting, Bennett Revocable Trust. Signed 2018. Calloway and Burke, Savannah. The sound of the pages turning filled the still room like a clock ticking in slow motion. Then I stopped at page 3. The clause I had written myself. Respect clause. If any heir fails to uphold the ethical and moral values of the Bennett family, full ownership shall immediately revert to the founder or to a designated successor. No further consent required. I read that line 3 times. I remembered the day Richard asked if I was sure I wanted to include it. I told him, if the day ever comes when my son forgets what respect means, at least the company will remember it for him. I sat still for a long while. Clayton never knew about this clause. When I handed him control, I told him everything was legally secure. He never asked what that meant. Maybe he thought trust was something I gave freely. I smiled faintly, not from pride, but from the quiet ache of being right about something no father wants to be right about. After breakfast, I drove to the old office on Whitaker Street. I hadn't been there in almost 2 years. The glass door reflected an older man, grayer hair, slower walk, steadier heart. I unlocked the door with the same key I'd kept on my ring, and the smell hit me at once: wood polish, engine oil, a trace of dust and memory. The fake plant Vanessa once said brought good luck still stood on the reception desk. I walked the hallway. My footsteps echoed on the tile, each one like a small knock on the past. My old office door still stood where it always had, though the plaque had changed. Clayton Bennett, CEO. I opened the door. Light spilled across the room over the freight routes pinned to the wall. I ran my fingers over the desk where I'd signed the company's first shipping contract out of Charleston, where Ellie once waited with a coffee mug in hand, her presence soft but grounding. I sat down at the old chair powered on the backup computer. The accounting files opened slowly, one by one. Everything looked orderly until the numbers began to twist. Transactions from last year, money moving out through a subsidiary listed under Clayton's name. I stared at the screen, wondering if he knew how thin the line was between innovation and betrayal. Near noon, I stepped outside. A Bennett freight truck rolled past, silver wings gleaming on its side, the same logo I'd designed in a diner one sleepless night 25 years ago. The paint was brighter, the slogan sharper, but the soul had changed. That wasn't just my company anymore. It was a legacy being hollowed out, one quiet deal at a time. By evening, I called Richard Calloway. His voice was the same, measured, steady, like the sound of reason itself. I asked if the respect clause was still enforceable. He said, if you never revoked it, it stands. Georgia law protects ethical clauses when they're written with clear intent. I asked, does anyone else know about it? He said, no, only you and me. No one else has a copy. I stayed silent for a long time. Then I said, hold tight. I'm not ready to act out of anger. I need to see the full picture first. Richard replied, Harold, I understand. But remember, the clause isn't meant to threaten. It's meant to protect. When the time comes, it will stand with you. After the call, I sat in the office until the light began to fade. The sun slipped through the blinds in long gold lines, landing across the desk. On the corner sat a small bronze truck, a model Noah gave me for my birthday 4 years ago. I picked it up. It still fit perfectly in my palm. I remembered his small hand placing it there, his voice bright with certainty. I'm gonna drive one just like you, Grandpa. My chest tightened. There were things I had to do, not just for the company, but for that boy. He needed to grow up knowing where respect begins. When the sun went down, I locked the office and drove home. The road along the river stretched quiet under the canopy of old oaks, their leaves turning the color of worn brass. Back in the garage, I shut off the engine and let the silence settle. The ticking of cooling metal filled the air, fading into stillness. I opened the door, stepped out. The smell of gasoline and iron mingled with the night wind. In the corner, the old Ford F-150 waited, its silver paint dull but strong as ever. I climbed onto the hood, felt the metal cold under my palms, and looked up. The moon hung full above Savannah, bright enough to burn the edges of the trees. Its light spilled over the truck's surface until it glowed. Ellie's voice came to me again, clear as the night she said it. Herald justice doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be right. I stayed there for a long time, listening to the river's slow rhythm against the shore like the heartbeat of something patient. I knew I'd crossed the line between silence and action. The trust wasn't just paper. It was what remained between Ellie and me, between fairness and betrayal. I reached for the keys on the hook by the door. The metal was cold, the weight familiar. And in that moment I could feel a decision forming, quiet, certain, not born of anger, but of something older, steadier. Self-respect finally awake. By noon the next day, laughter drifted through the house. Bright hollow, echoing in that strange way laughter does when it doesn't belong. I stepped out of my office and saw Vanessa at the dining table, arranging her camera, fixing the lighting, adjusting the dishes so they gleamed under the sun. She called Clayton over. Noah sat at the end of the table, white shirt, crisp hair slicked back, spoon of ice cream balanced between his teeth. Vanessa said she was filming a short video for her channel. She started her countdown, 3, 2, 1, her voice bright, and trained her smile wide enough for a thumbnail. The table looked immaculate. Too perfect. Every glass, every napkin, every reflection staged for an audience that wasn't in the room. Sunlight bounced off the table's polished surface, and for a brief second I saw myself reflected in the lens, faint, unfocused, like a ghost in someone else's home. I meant to walk past, but Vanessa turned toward me. Her tone was light, polite, yet edged with something unmistakable. "Would you mind stepping outside for a bit? I need natural light." I froze for a moment. The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any argument Clayton and I had ever had. Natural light. A polite way to say my presence spoiled the frame. I nodded without a word and stepped onto the porch. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was small, metallic, final, like a blade being sheathed. I walked down the stone path leading to the backyard. The Savannah sun filtered through the oak branches, stretching my shadow long across the grass. From inside, Vanessa's voice rose again, louder this time, rehearsed and sweet. She was talking to her viewers now, not to her family. Another lovely Bennett family dinner celebrating our company's bright future. I smiled faintly, almost involuntarily. In that perfect little video, I would be invisible, erased in post-production. An hour later, I passed through the living room and saw her editing. Just a glimpse of her screen was enough. The caption read, "Dinner with my beautiful family and our company's future." She added soft background music, then laughed. "This one's gonna do numbers," she said. Clayton didn't look up. His voice was low, flat. "Yeah." I stepped outside again onto the front porch and sat down in the old wooden chair. My phone buzzed a notification. The video was live. I watched. There it was. The house glowed under golden light. Vanessa laughing, Clayton raising his glass, Noah waving his spoon. Everything was perfect, carefully arranged, the ideal family, the curated dream. And in the lower right corner of the frame where I'd always sat was a polished stretch of empty wood. The house looked alive, but it wasn't breathing. I turned off the phone. The screen went black, and my reflection stared back, dim, silent, fading. Later, as evening settled, I was in the garage wiping down the old truck. The paint on the hood had peeled into thin flakes. My fingers traced the edges where time had bitten through. From inside I heard footsteps, the creak of a door, the rhythm of laughter blending with conversation. I wasn't trying to listen, but the window was open, and the wind carried their voices in. "If Harold signs soon," Vanessa said, her tone smooth, practical, "we can finalize the New Haven deal this week. They just need his signature." My hand froze midair. Clayton's voice followed, weary but complicit. I'm trying. He keeps avoiding it. Then make him believe you're saving the company, she said. Once it's signed, we can make everything official. Then a laugh, short, certain, sharp. I stepped back, leaning against the wall, my pulse heavy in my ears. The words replayed one by one, carving themselves into the air. They didn't just want my consent. They wanted my name, to use it as cover for something I'd never agreed to. My mind went to the trust, to the clause I'd read that morning, the one about respect and values. I understood it now. Respect couldn't survive in a house where people used it as leverage. The laughter inside faded. A door closed. The house fell quiet again. Only the steady hum of the air conditioner remained, and the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I stepped outside onto the porch. The river caught the last light of the day, the water dark and gleaming like bronze. The air smelled of salt and fallen leaves. I thought of Ellie. What would she have done if she'd seen our son turn a family promise into a transaction? She wouldn't have raised her voice. She would have stood still like she did the night I opened that envelope. Back in the garage, the light through the open door was fading to amber. The truck's surface glowed in fractured patches. I pulled a small notebook from my shirt pocket and opened it. Not a plan, not revenge, just a way to keep my thoughts from breaking apart. I wrote one line. Don't forget this company was built on trust, not signatures. Then I closed the notebook and set it down on the workbench. Inside, the television played some cheerful game show. Noah's laughter mingled with the canned applause. He had no idea what was happening around him, and I was grateful for that. At least one person in this house still saw the world without price tags. I stayed there until the last light drained from the sky. The darkness crept in slowly, filling the corners of the garage. Crickets started up outside. I turned on the small hanging bulb above me. The amber light washed over the truck's windshield, catching my reflection. My eyes looked tired but clear. I could see everything now. What was being used, what was being taken, and what I would no longer allow them to touch. They could use my roof, my silence, even my blood. But not Ellie's name. Not Bennett. Not the thing we built with our hands and our faith and our quiet kind of love. That night, I ate alone. The wind from the river drifted in, carrying the faint salt of the tide. On the table, the laptop glowed faintly in the dark. In my mind, I could hear Richard's voice, slow, deliberate. That clause only matters if the founder chooses to make it matter. I closed the laptop, switched off the light, and the room folded back into darkness, quiet, certain waiting. The next afternoon, Savannah lay under a clean, cloudless sky, the kind that looks freshly painted. Sunlight slid through the oak branches and fell across the porch in long, thin bands. I brewed a pot of coffee and opened my laptop on the wooden desk. The first sip hadn't touched my lips when the computer chimed a single flat tone that seemed too sharp for the quiet room. A new message waited in my inbox. The address looked unfamiliar, yet something about it tugged at memory. I opened it. 3 short lines appeared, precise, cold, almost surgical. They've sent the draft to sell 49% to New Haven. If it's signed, the Bennett Trust will lose validity. Don't let them use your name. I sat up straight as if a stone had been set inside my chest. The rhythm of the punctuation, the restraint of every word. The final period, Sarah Langdon. Her name wasn't there, but her voice was. I could hear it as clearly as if she'd whispered beside me. She knew every number inside the company, every clause in the trust Richard and I wrote back in 2018. I pictured her thin fingers hovering over the keyboard, pausing before hitting send, aware that silence was her duty, but also that silence sometimes had to speak. I pulled the leather-bound notebook from the drawer, flipped to a blank page, and wrote one line, slow, deliberate, to keep myself from writing in anger. I will not shout. I will let the truth make the noise. The pen moved heavy, like it was etching the words into stone. From the living room came the sound of Noah's laughter over the cartoon on TV. I closed the notebook, picked up the phone, and dialed Richard Calloway. The line rang twice before his steady voice came through. I need a simple answer, I said. If I activate the Bennett Trust right now, what happens under Georgia law? He was silent long enough for me to imagine him flipping a page in one of his case files. Then his voice came back firm and even. When the trust is activated, full ownership of Bennett Freight reverts immediately to the founder, as stipulated in the signed document. All pending transactions are frozen for 48 hours while the state verifies the claim. No one can sell, transfer, or use company assets as collateral during that window. After review, ownership remains in the trust until a new directive is filed. I asked if an acting manager could bypass the clause with temporary authorization. No, Richard said. Management authority doesn't override ownership, and it cannot supersede an ethical clause that's been notarized. He paused. There may be backlash, Harold, but the document stands with you. Through the window, I caught the low hum of a Bennett freight truck turning onto Whitaker Street, its engine's growl muffled by the glass. Be ready, I said. Don't send anything until my second call. I need tonight to think, not to reconsider, but to make sure what I do comes from reason, not anger. When the call ended, I pressed both palms against the desk until my pulse steadied. Then I opened Sarah's old payroll folders on my laptop. Her color-coded notes, her tight handwriting, her quiet precision. The records told their own story: deposits to an unlisted subsidiary under Clayton's name, small but consistent transfers with vague descriptions. I didn't speculate. I didn't need to. Proof doesn't need to raise its voice. It only needs to stand still long enough to be seen. Footsteps passed the open doorway. Vanessa's perfume drifted through a light floral note, crisp and rehearsed. Her heels clicked against the hardwood. She was on the phone saying she'd post a new family and brand future video over the weekend. I closed the laptop and stepped outside. The sunlight on the river was fading gold, turning to bronze. The water shifted its color the way a thought changes mid-sentence, slow, quiet, certain. Back in the garage, I switched on the old yellow bulb. The light spilled over the Ford F-150, resting in the corner, its silver paint softened by years of dust and weather. I remembered the first night I rolled that truck out of a friend's lot in Charleston, its engine barely alive, headlights dim as candlelight. I promised Ellie I'd bring it home and make it whole again. And I did. We made our first deliveries in the sweltering summer heat, me driving Ellie beside me with the map spread across her lap, handing me a bite of her sandwich between turns. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool metal pulse faintly against my skin. Some things don't need words to prove they exist. From the small drawer by the workbench, I took out a thin envelope. Inside was Ellie's letter from the fall of 2020, written when her eyesight had already begun to dim. Her handwriting remained neat, patient, steady. She wrote about the night we lost our first big contract in Jacksonville, how I'd yelled at my team, then spent the night cleaning the warehouse alone, wordless but ashamed. Don't let fear make you speak louder than truth, she wrote. Silence isn't weakness. It's the moment someone chooses fairness instead of fury. I placed my hand over the word fairness, held it there until I felt my heartbeat steady. I didn't cry, but the garage lights blurred at their edges. That letter wasn't just a memory. It was a map, straight and simple, pointing me back to the man I'd promised her I'd remain. From inside came the sound of dishes clinking, then Noah's voice calling for his mother, then silence. Clayton's footsteps followed slow, deliberate pausing, 2 seconds outside the garage, before moving on. He was already reaching for another shore building, something on sand, while pretending it was stone. But real ground, I knew, was made of respect, not signatures. I stayed where I was. Tonight wasn't the time for confrontation. Words spoken too early only feed the fire. I reopened the laptop and added one more line beneath my earlier note. When the truth is strong enough, it doesn't need a push. The sentence sat there weighty and calm like a latch closing on a door that should never have been opened. Before bed, I stood in my small study and opened the window. The night breeze moved through the curtains, cool and slow. The city hummed faintly in the distance, but the house itself felt still like a ship anchored after a long voyage. On the shelf, Ellie's photo caught the moonlight. Taken at the Savannah Pier in 2015, her smile bright, her hair lifting in the wind. I touched the frame and heard her voice where my heartbeat was. Hold steady, wait for morning, then do what's right. Tomorrow I'd call Richard. Tonight, I only needed to hold one truth steady. Justice doesn't fight with noise. It enters through the quiet door and stands patient and tall like an old friend come home. Night fell over the house like a thin quilt, soft, weightless, and absolute. I sat at the small desk by the window, the leather-bound notebook open before me, its edges frayed like an old coat that's been through too many winters. The page was white and still flat as the surface of a lake at dawn. I began to write slow, deliberate strokes, the kind that sound more like breathing than movement. You don't have to teach them with words. Let the truth do it. The pen glided across the page without hesitation, steady and calm, as though my hand had known this sentence for years and was only now setting it free. The house was so quiet, I could hear the second hand of the clock tapping through the room like a metronome. In the living room, the television was dark, its glass screen reflecting the faint outline of an empty chair and the pale shape of the wall behind it. From the porch came the wind off the Savannah River, carrying with it the taste of salt and the faint green scent of oak leaves just beginning to bud. I closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair, listening to the house, to the night, to the sound of my own breathing until it fell into rhythm again. I poured a cup of black coffee, watched the steam rise and curl, felt the warmth on my face, a small human reminder that I was still here, still awake. At 11 sharp, I picked up the phone and called Richard Calloway. 2 rings. Then his voice, low, measured the kind of voice built on decades spent between contracts and signatures. "I'm ready," I said. "Prepare to activate the Bennett Trust tomorrow morning." There was no pause. "I'll send the filing at 7:30, he replied. "A notice will go to Clayton for transparency." I heard the soft rustle of papers, the faint rhythm of his pen tapping against wood. "Any temporary injunctions?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "Just one thing. Let the law speak for itself." The call ended as neatly as it began. I set the phone down and walked to the half-open window. Savannah's sky was a deep blue-black, a bruise spreading across the horizon. Far out, tugboats crept along the river, their lights small and patient like moving stars. The night wind slipped through the curtain, brushed my wrist, and carried the sound of leaves rubbing together outside. When I closed my eyes, I could see Ellie sitting on the old porch steps, hands folded in her lap, her eyes kind but unyielding. And in the quiet between my breaths, I heard her voice again, near enough to touch Harold. Silence is where justice begins. I left the study and went downstairs. In the kitchen, I turned on the stove just long enough to hear the soft tick of the gas igniter, then shut it off. Habit. proof of alertness. The porcelain cups lined up neatly on the shelf. I reached for one, a white cup with a small chip on the handle. Ellie's cup. The one she used while watching me balance freight logs late into the night. I didn't pour anything into it. I just held it, feeling the cool ceramic slowly warm under my palms. Upstairs, a door opened and closed. Noah's room. His footsteps padded softly down the hall light, and quick, the kind of steps a child takes when trying not to wake the house. I smiled faintly. I thought of the crayon drawing he'd given me last year, his little truck with crooked wheels and, underneath, the words scrawled in uneven letters, "Grandpa drives best." That boy deserved to grow up in a house where people respected one another. And if it took the law to remind them of that, then the law would do. Back in the study, I checked the time, 11:45. I opened an email draft addressed to myself, written earlier that day. Just a few notes. Call Richard on time. Don't argue in the morning. Let the document speak. I switched on the desk lamp. The light poured over the stack of files, tracing their edges like a road map of all the miles I'd driven and the choices I'd made. I ran a hand over the cover of one folder, the paper cool and firm under my skin. Sarah's handwriting still lined the margins, abbreviations for banks, contract numbers, coded markings only someone who'd lived inside ledgers could understand. I nodded to myself. Some loyalties don't need to be praised. They just stand straight-backed, silent, and steadfast. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight. The sound cut the night cleanly in half. I walked to the window again. The garden outside lay in silver shadow. The old swing still hung from the oak branch unmoving. Ellie used to sit there on cool afternoons, legs crossed at the ankles, a book open in her lap, the light trembling through the leaves above her. That memory didn't make me ache anymore. It steadied me. It built a quiet wall around my heart strong enough that no raised voice could break through. I reviewed my plan for the morning. There wasn't much. I'd sit at the kitchen table, pour a cup of coffee, wait for the phone to buzz. Richard would say, "It's done." Then I'd sit a moment longer in the quiet. By then, Clayton would open his email. Vanessa might be filming another video, arranging flowers, or icing a cake under the bright kitchen lights. They'd hear the law call this house by its rightful name, and I wouldn't see it as revenge. The minute hand crept forward one notch. I stared at the clock, inhaled deeply, held the breath for a long, deliberate beat, then let it go. Everything was about to shift, not with noise or anger, but with the weight of something already signed, sealed, and waiting for morning. I leaned back in the chair, turned the phone face down. The screen went dark and still flat as the river before sunrise. Outside, the wind changed direction, carrying a sharper scent of salt from the water. I pulled my knees up onto the chair, listening to the faint rustle of the rug beneath me. Every door in the house was closed. Beyond the walls, the city kept turning. I let my eyes close, not in weariness, but in surrender to stillness, a brief rest before the climb ahead. Like a driver pulling off to the shoulder just before the road bends into the mountains. Morning light spilled through the curtains as I opened my eyes. The house was so still, it felt like the night hadn't fully left yet. When I walked into the kitchen, the wall clock read 7:28. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with butter sizzling in Vanessa's skillet. Noah sat at the table, bent over his drawing coloring, in the half-finished red truck from the night before. Across from him, Clayton hunched over his laptop, his face tight drawn like a wire ready to snap. I pulled out a chair and sat at the head of the table. The world looked ordinary, breakfast, sunlight, family, but the air had changed density. Each breath felt heavier. I knew the email was already sitting in Clayton's inbox. Richard had said he'd send it at 7:30 sharp, and Richard never missed a deadline. I lifted my cup, took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter but clean, sharp enough to keep me present. I set it down just as the minute hand clicked to the mark. The chime from Clayton's laptop cut through the room, a single short tone, precise as a knife sliding into cloth. He flinched, opened his inbox, scrolled. His eyes moved down the screen, stopped. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear Noah's pencil scratching paper. Vanessa turned from the stove. "What is it?" Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled, the spatula shaking slightly over the pan. Clayton didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the monitor. His lips pressed tight, then parted just enough for a hoarse whisper. "It can't be." I placed my cup down gently. "It can," I thought. And then the phone rang. The sound sliced the air clean. The call transferred to the living room screen where Richard Calloway's face appeared crisp under morning light. Papers stacked behind him, his wooden desk perfectly squared. His tone was professional, flat formal, the voice of a man who'd lived his life in legal certainties. According to the records verified this morning, he said Bennett Freight and Storage has never been lawfully transferred. All holding shares and subsidiary assets remain under the ownership of Mr. Harold Bennett, as defined in the Bennett Revocable Trust, executed in 2018. Vanessa froze. The spatula slipped from her hand, hit the floor with a hollow clatter. Clayton stared at the screen, his face drained of color. I didn't move. My hands were folded in front of my cup. Richard continued his cadence unwavering. "All pending transactions are frozen for 48 hours pending court validation. Mr. Bennett, operational authority, remains with you until further notice." The kitchen fell utterly still. I could hear the clock ticking again, the smallest sound made enormous by the silence. I could hear Noah flip a page of his drawing pad. Light streamed through the window, cutting the room in half, one side gold, and warm, the other cool and gray. Clayton swallowed hard. His voice came out low, cracked. "What did you do, Dad? Are you trying to destroy everything?" I looked at him and spoke slowly. "There's nothing to destroy. What was never lost doesn't need to be reclaimed. Now you understand why I never had to sign." Vanessa's face turned pale. Her voice lifted, strained and sharp. "You can't do this. We built that deal to save the company." "The company still stands," I said. "It just no longer belongs to people who forgot what respect looks like." She bit her lip, glancing toward the stack of documents on the counter, her mind already racing somewhere I couldn't follow. Richard cleared his throat on the screen. "I've sent certified copies to both parties with confirmation from Chatham County Court. If you need further discussion, I'll be in my office at 9. He paused just long enough to let the words breathe. "Savannah has beautiful weather this morning," he added. "Seems like a good day for new beginnings." The screen dimmed, then went black. Silence settled in its place. When I set my cup down, the sound echoed through the kitchen like a closing door. Clayton stood motionless, arms at his sides. Then his phone slipped from his hand, hit the floor, with a hollow, final thud. Noah jumped at the sound. Vanessa bent to pick up the phone. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold, bright, and sharp like a blade still inside its sheath. I stood, walked toward the window. The river outside shimmered in the newborn light, its surface trembling under the morning breeze. The water looked like glass, stretched thin, reflecting a sky too bright to stare at directly. Behind me, I heard Clayton's voice, broken low, unsteady. "How long, Dad, how long have you kept this from me?" I turned. "Since the day you stopped saying thank you." He froze. His eyes widened, then fell. He sank into his chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Vanessa moved toward him, reached for his shoulder. He shrugged her off, wordless. She stepped back, eyes darting between us, confusion clouding whatever pride was left. I said nothing more. There was nothing left to add. Every word had already been spoken by the document, by the law, by time itself. Noah climbed down from his chair, holding out the paper in his hand. "Grandpa," he said softly. I finished the truck. I knelt beside him. The crayon lines were messy, but full of life, a red truck rolling down a winding green road beneath a bright blue sky. I smiled and patted his head. "Looks good, kiddo. That truck still runs just fine." Behind us, Vanessa sat down heavily, her hands clasped tight, staring toward the doorway as if it could offer escape. Clayton stayed hunched over, silent, and for a moment, just a moment, the house felt level again. No shouting, no pretense, only the truth standing there in the middle, clear and still like a sheet of clean paper catching the morning sun. I lifted my cup, took the last sip. The coffee was warm against my lips, strong, grounding enough to keep me awake through what came next. The clock on the wall read 7:32. That was the exact minute everything hidden stepped into the light quietly, without fanfare, without rage. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to arrive on time. And that morning in the house by the Savannah River, truth kept its appointment. 2 days passed like twin stones tied around the neck of the house. By Monday morning, a fine rain hung over the Savannah River, thin as gauze, soft as breath. I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table watching water streak down the window pane. My phone buzzed once, then fell silent. The message came from New Haven Capital, the kind of letter that carries no emotion, only weight. They were withdrawing from all pending negotiations due to ownership inconsistencies and a need for formal verification of the Bennett trust. The final line was a courtesy wound. "We wish the company the best of luck during its restructuring." By the time I reached the signature line, I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Clayton entered, eyes bruised with sleeplessness, stubble shadowing his jaw. He snatched the phone from my hand, scanned the email, and his face changed color, like the sky before a storm. He threw the phone onto the table, voice cracking mid-sentence. "You've ruined everything." I looked at him, steadying my breath with a hand wrapped around my cup. "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "I just kept what was already mine." He laughed, a dry, broken sound, like air passing through a house that had lost its walls. Vanessa appeared from the living room, thumb flicking across her phone as she muttered about posting schedules, brand contracts, and new video deadlines. She froze when she saw Clayton's face. A moment later, she opened her inbox, read the same message, and exhaled hard. The phone slipped from her hand, struck the table's edge, and skidded to the floor. I picked it up and offered it back. She didn't take it. Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the window, toward the emptiness that had just opened inside the house. She whispered that all her sponsorships were tied to the company's name, that her followers were waiting for the family announcement. Her voice sharpened, grew thin as glass. "I just lost everything," she said. I stood upright, met her eyes, and said evenly, "Reputation can't save a family that's lost respect." The words landed on the tile floor like a nail hammered in straight. Noah padded into the kitchen, hair tousled, clutching a blue-covered sketchbook. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Aren't we having breakfast?" I told him I was making another pot of coffee, that I'd drive him to school. He sat down quietly and began coloring a picture of a boat gliding down a river. The blue pencil bled at the edges of the paper. Clayton paced the room, phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline. He was talking fast, something about credit lines, payroll contracts, pending. I couldn't hear the other voice, only the way his face paled with every second. When the call ended, he leaned on the counter, catching his breath like a man who'd surfaced from deep water. If the funds don't clear by tomorrow, he said, 2 freight routes shut down. Drivers won't get paid. I thought of the men who'd been there since the beginning. Mason, who changed a tire with me in the Charleston rain. Reed, the warehouse foreman, with hands like carved wood. Respect starts with paying people on time, I said. Tell them the truth, and they'll stay another week. Lie to them, and they'll leave before lunch. Vanessa switched on the TV, flipping through channels until a headline about a family-owned company imploding in Jacksonville flashed across the screen. She turned it off immediately. We can't let this get out, she said. If we control the story, we can still fix this. I met her gaze, her mascara-lined eyes already searching for a camera that wasn't there. There's no story that can save something broken from the inside, I said. By noon, the clouds began to lift a little. I called Richard for an update. He said all filings had been submitted and the court would confirm within 48 hours. Keep calm, he warned. Arguing now is like putting emotion on the scale against the law. I know, I said, and thanked him. When I hung up, the hallway door burst open. Clayton was already wearing his jacket. I'm going to the bank, he said, his voice clipped. I'll talk to them face to face. Vanessa called after him, telling him to take the sample contracts and cash flow sheets. The door slammed behind him. The sound left a vacuum, the kind of silence that fills a church after service. I cleared the table, washed the cups, then sat beside Noah. He slid his finished drawing toward me, a red ship crossing a gray bridge, the word Bennett scrawled in careful block letters on the hull. I smiled. You got it right. Just needs a few ripples on the water. He added 3 light blue strokes, then looked up, eyes bright with quiet pride. For a moment my heart softened and then steadied. Children don't need to see adults perform strength. They just need to see them stand upright. By late afternoon, the light dimmed behind the clouds. Clayton came back drenched in sweat, clutching a folder wrinkled at the corners. He laid it on the table, his voice low and unsteady. The bank needs official verification of ownership. All credit lines are frozen until the trust is confirmed. He stood there like a man hearing the gears of a once-perfect machine grind to a stop. Then Vanessa's phone rang. She answered, her tone sliding through the familiar language of brand deals, sponsorships, deadlines. It faltered halfway. Then her voice fell. When she hung up, she leaned against the counter. The biggest sponsor just paused the campaign, she said. They want to see what happens with the company. She looked at me like she was staring into a mirror that refused to show her reflection. I built everything on stability, on perfect dinners, perfect photos, perfect family stories, she said quietly. Now I don't know what to tell them. I met her eyes. Sometimes, I said, the only thing people need to hear is, I'm sorry. By evening, the rain thickened. City lights blurred into soft gold stains on the wet glass. I went upstairs for my jacket, then headed down to the garage. I switched on the small hanging bulb, wiped the hood of the old Ford. The smell of oil and rain mixed in the air, grounding me in something real. I sat on the wooden stool and listened to the rain tapping steady on the roof, each drop sounding like a metronome for consequence. I didn't count the calls waiting for tomorrow, or the emails, or the bridges still standing in the storm. I thought only of one thing, the truth standing in the center of this house, asking everyone left inside to look straight at it. Footsteps echoed near the doorway. Clayton stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes red. The bank sent an official notice, he said. I nodded. Read it. His voice shook as he read from his phone. Company account frozen pending ownership review. All transactions suspended until final decision. The air in the garage thickened, the scent of metal sharper. Not the smell of failure, something closer to discipline finding its way back to steel. Then Noah appeared in the doorway, rain on his shoes, a small yellow umbrella in hand. He looked at his father, then at me. No words came. He stood there for a moment, then set the umbrella beside my chair. His gaze lingered on the folded letter from Ellie peeking out of my shirt pocket. I patted his shoulder. He understood in the quiet, unspoken way children do. From the living room, Vanessa's voice floated out thin against the hum of rain. "Dinner's ready," she called. I met Clayton's eyes. The anger was gone, now replaced by exhaustion, the hollow kind that follows realization. "Tomorrow," I said, "meet with the drivers and warehouse team. Tell them the truth. As for New Haven, leave that to me and Richard. The law will sort what pride can't." We walked back inside, each carrying our own version of silence. The dining room glowed with its familiar yellow light, still trying to make the house look warm. But no picture-perfect frame could hold it anymore. Only the real meal, the real people, and the real consequences knocking on the door in the form of a letter from the bank. 3 days later, the house had learned to breathe differently. No one had forbidden speaking, but every word that rose into the air seemed to lose its balance halfway up, falling to the floor, like crumbs from an old table. Morning still sounded the same. The coffee maker hummed. The garbage truck whistled at the end of the street. The river carried its salt and wind as faithfully as ever. But inside, every footstep softened, as if afraid to wake something sleeping just beneath the walls. Vanessa woke early. She made herself a green smoothie and sat at the counter staring at a phone that no longer lit up with notifications. She moved quietly, chair sliding, softly, glass rinsed, without a clink, door opening like a sigh. Once when I told her the coffee was ready, she nodded and whispered thank you, so faintly I thought I'd imagined it. Then she walked back to her room, leaving behind a faint trace of perfume that hung in the air, like a thread with no knot to tie itself to. Clayton barely left his office. The door stayed shut, a slice of blue light spilling through the gap like cold water. At night, I could hear the rhythm of his keyboard steady breaking, then resuming again, like the heartbeat of someone trying to remember how to breathe. Sometimes a chair scraped, sometimes it didn't. When he stepped into the hall, he avoided my eyes, mumbling something about more calls to make before disappearing again into that cold blue light. I let him. Some lessons a man has to walk through the dark to learn. I kept cooking dinner. The knife stayed in its place. The cutting board still bore the scars of old meals. The soup simmered quietly, steam rising with the scent of pepper and parsley. I set 4 plates, then put 2 back. Noah sat beside me, his backpack by the table leg, posture straight, eyes calm but bright. We ate slowly. I passed him another slice of roast. He slid me a piece of cornbread and said, "This is for you, Grandpa. You worked all day." That made me smile. No laughter, no arguing, just the clinking of spoons, the soft crack of melting ice, and the faint whistle of wind slipping through the back door. On the second afternoon, Vanessa came out of her room, arms full of laundry. She sorted the clothes one by one as if counting days that had passed. She caught her reflection in the small magnet mirror on the fridge, smoothed her hair, and tucked her phone into her pocket without checking it. When she walked past, she said softly, she wouldn't be joining dinner tonight. She wasn't ready. I told her, do what feels right. This kitchen doesn't rush anyone. She paused a second, then nodded. On the third night, Clayton opened his door later than usual. He stood there holding a stack of worn papers, shadows under his eyes. "Is there any food left?" he asked. "There's soup on the stove," I said, "and fresh bread in the oven." He nodded, said thank you, just that. The word dropped between us like a small stone into still water. No ripple, but the surface shifted all the same. He ate quietly, washed his bowl, and went back to his room. The door closed softly this time. That night I took Noah for a walk around the backyard. The air was cool and thin, the oak leaves whispering against one another like a secret, too gentle to name. He pointed upward. "Teacher showed us the constellations," he said. "But I only remember the Big Dipper." I smiled. "That's all I ever saw at your age. The rest takes time." When we came back inside, he went upstairs. I stayed in the living room. Ellie's photograph hung above the bookshelf. I pulled a chair closer and sat facing it. Outside, the river caught the last light of dusk, amber slipping through the curtains, washing her face in a soft, living glow. For a moment, she looked less like a picture, and more like someone just waking from a long sleep, smiling across the room. I rested my arm on the chair's edge, the wood polished smooth by years of elbows and memories. And in that stillness, I could hear the house breathing again, steady, patient, alive. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from Richard. "Do you want me to stop by tomorrow night?" I wrote back, "Not yet. Let the house stay quiet one more evening." I set the phone aside and looked again at Ellie's face. The light was retreating now, drawing out of the room like the tide pulling from a sandbar. Yet the frame still held a faint glow, as if someone had placed a candle behind the glass. I poured another cup of tea and sat down again. From the kitchen, the clock ticked steadily, each strike like a small stone laid carefully along a riverbank. I thought of the words I hadn't said these 3 days, the apologies waiting for the right hour, the choices waiting for sunrise when the bank reopened. But not yet. Not now. I wanted the silence to finish its work, to soak into the walls, to return something of itself to the air, a rhythm that felt trustworthy again. The room was quiet. I leaned back, exhaled slowly. Outside, a tugboat groaned as it pulled another line of barges around the bend. On the wall, Ellie's picture seemed to hold its own light. Not bright, not showy, just enough to make her smile visible, calm and steady, like a lantern lit for the way home. I sat upright, lifted my hand toward the frame, stopping just short of touching it. A small gesture, a greeting maybe. I knew what tomorrow would bring. Calls, documents, the long noise of life restarting. This peace wouldn't last. But right then, in that fragile stillness, the house remembered how to be quiet. A child learned what listening meant. A tired man relearned how to say thank you. A woman began to find her way back to the table. And I looked at Ellie's light and saw her smiling. A smile strong enough to hold the room together, soft enough to last, and steady enough to remind me sometimes. Silence in the right place can save a whole house. Sunday morning opened in a soft, milky light that poured itself over the Savannah River like a slow spill. I sat at my desk, holding Ellie's old Parker fountain pen, the same one she'd used to sign the first invoices back when the company was nothing more than a single truck and a borrowed warehouse. The page before me was blank, but not empty. When the first line finally came and the rest followed easily, as if the words had been waiting inside me for years. For Clayton and Vanessa, when you're ready to listen. I paused, hearing the faint whistle of wind under the porch eaves, then kept writing. I told them about the early days on Bay Street, the smell of oil and new lumber, my sunburned hands gripping the wheel as I hauled freight between Savannah and Charleston. I wrote about Ellie, the woman who kept me upright through the years when things could have broken. The one who used to say, family before profit, and warned that the moment we forgot that everything we built would start to fall apart. I wrote about the day the company bought its third truck when 16-year-old Clayton rode with me on his first delivery run. His hands shook, but his eyes were lit with fire. That day, I'd felt pride and something else too, the first flicker of his hunger to outrun everyone. I didn't fault him for it. Youth always wants to prove itself. I only hoped that someday he'd understand what really keeps a man grounded in this world. Isn't speed, it's respect. The lines leaned slightly toward the edge of the page. I set the pen down, took a slow breath, and wrote the last sentence, the one I knew Ellie would have written herself. No one is richer than the person who's respected. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and wrote their names across the front. Then I placed it on the dining table, the same table that had heard too many empty words and too few honest ones. From the drawer, I took the house keys and added a small wooden tag carved with the initials E.B. I set it beside the envelope. Morning sunlight slanted through the window, spilling across the table's polished surface until it gleamed like a quiet mirror. In it, I saw a man with silver hair and tired eyes, but not a broken one. Upstairs, Noah was still asleep, knees tucked to his chest, breathing steady and slow. I touched his shoulder gently. "I have to go away for a little while," I whispered. "When the sun hits your classroom window, remember to eat breakfast and help your dad." He stirred, murmured something I couldn't make out, and drifted back into his small, safe world. In the garage, the old Ford F-150 waited, paint-faded heart still strong. I brushed the dust off the hood and placed on it a small notebook Ellie had written back in 2018. On the first page, she'd written her summer wish to go back to the Wilmington cabin to see the lavender bloom and hang our wedding photo on the cedar wall. I read the line once more, folded the notebook, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The engine came alive, low and even. I drove slowly down the familiar road, tires crunching over a blanket of dry leaves. In the rearview mirror, the house stood still. The second-floor curtains swayed gently, catching the sunlight and tossing it back in a wave of gold, like the house was saying goodbye in its own quiet way. I didn't turn back. I just tightened my grip on the wheel. The Talmadge Bridge opened ahead, its steel arches stretching toward the sky. The river below shimmered like molten glass, each ripple catching the dawn in pieces of pale gold. I eased off the gas and let the truck roll, alone but not lonely. The morning wind swept in through the window, salt metal memory. I thought of the first time Ellie and I crossed this bridge in this same truck. She'd laughed, hair whipping in the wind, and said, "When we're old, this is all I'll ever need, a place to hear the wind and watch the water." Now I was doing exactly that. The turnoff to Magnolia Bluff came up. The oak trees lined both sides of the road like old sentinels keeping watch. I lowered the window, listening to the gravel crackle under the tires, breathing in the mix of pine sap and wet earth. The drive wasn't long, 2 hours at most, but it felt like leaving one life and entering another. When I reached the cabin, the sun had fully broken through the clouds. The roof was weathered but solid. One of the windows on the porch stood half open, its curtains stirring exactly the way Ellie used to leave it. I pushed the door open. Dust lifted in slow spirals. The air smelled of cedar and old lavender. Her photograph still hung on the wall, summer of 2015. The two of us standing on the porch, her face tilted toward the light. I filled a glass with water and sat by the window. From there I could see the Wilmington River, darker and calmer than the Savannah, the current moving slow but steady. I pulled out another sheet of paper and began to write just a few lines, this time to myself. Today's the first day I haven't felt the need to prove anything. I don't need to win. I just need to know I held on to what was right. Leaning back against the doorframe, I whispered it silently, as if to her, "You can rest easy now, Ellie." I didn't let the noise win over the quiet. I didn't let trust get sold off for convenience. Outside, the river kept moving slow, faithful, unending. Like truth itself, sometimes quiet, sometimes unseen, but always inevitably finding its way home. Wednesday morning rose over the Wilmington River flat and pale as a pane of blue glass. I was sitting on the porch, coffee steaming in my hand, when I heard the sound of an engine coming down the dirt road behind the cabin. Tires crunched over dry gravel, then went still. I knew it was Clayton before the door even opened. Some sounds you never forget, like the voice of someone who once called you father. The car door shut. A pause. Then slow footsteps approached the porch. I didn't turn around right away. I let the wind carry in the smell of wet grass from the riverbank, let the warmth of the cup seep through my fingers, then set it down on the table. When I finally looked up, Clayton was standing at the steps. He looked older, drawn unshaven eyes hollow and rimmed with fatigue. His gray shirt was wrinkled, his hand gripping a baseball cap so tight, his knuckles had gone white. I said nothing, just pulled out the chair beside me and motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, then sat down staring at the porch boards. The river lapped gently against the dock. After a long silence, his voice came hoarse, rough, like someone swallowing a week of regret. "Dad, I've lost nearly every contract, and I think I finally understand." Sunlight slanted across the table, warm and gold against my hands. "No one loses," I said softly, "if you still remember what's worth keeping." He looked up, eyes unsteady, then down again. "I was too sure of myself," he said. "I thought the company only needed me. I thought what you built could be traded for something faster. Turns out the one thing you spent your life protecting was the first thing I threw away." I didn't answer. Some apologies, if spoken too soon, are empty. Too late they're wounds. So I let silence do the work. The wind stirred the porch curtains, bringing with it the mingled scent of wood and salt. Then came the faint hum of another engine stopping at the end of the road. I looked up. Noah stepped out of Vanessa's car, clutching a long cardboard tube, sprinting across the yard. His hair caught the sun, his sneakers kicking up dust. He stopped at the porch, panting, and held out the roll. "Grandpa, I drew this for you." I unrolled it, our cabin, the dock, two figures sitting side by side. In the corner, in crooked letters, he'd written "Me and Grandpa at the pier." I smiled and brushed a hand over his hair, the warmth of it, like sunlight resting on skin. Clayton stared at the drawing for a long time. Then his eyes shifted to the wall inside, to the photograph of Ellie, the one taken right here the day of our wedding. She stood by our first truck, hair caught mid-laugh in the wind. He stared so long I wasn't sure he was breathing. Then he whispered, voice breaking, "Mom wouldn't be proud of who I've become." I walked to the photo, laid a hand on the wooden frame. "I don't need an apology," I said quietly. "Just remember the lesson. Don't let the same pride bring you back to the place you just escaped." He nodded, eyes fixed on Ellie's face. Noah placed the drawing on the table and pulled a chair beside me. "Grandpa, can we go down to the dock?" I nodded. We stepped outside. The breeze had grown stronger, brushing small ripples across the river. Clayton followed his footsteps, careful, like someone afraid of breaking something fragile between us. The dock was weathered but sturdy. I sat on the lowest step. Noah beside me, legs swinging over the water. Clayton stayed back a moment, then sat too, leaning slightly forward, as if unsure where to fit himself. No one spoke. Only the soft slap of water against the posts, the distant cry of gulls, and the shared rhythm of our breathing. I looked from Clayton to Noah. The boy was turning a shell over in his fingers. Clayton's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow descent. The last light stretched across the water in a thin golden ribbon. For a moment I imagined Ellie somewhere inside that light, watching us, her smile moving with the breeze. Clayton's voice came low. "I don't know how to start over." "No one does," I said. "But if you don't start with anger, you're already halfway there." He turned to me, his eyes softer now. "Thank you, Dad," he said. "I think this is the first time I've really listened." I nodded. There was nothing left to add. Noah pointed to the water. "Look. Our shadows." I glanced down. 3 reflections shimmered side by side, blurred, inseparable. I placed my hand on Noah's shoulder, then met Clayton's eyes. The wind stirred, the river answered. We stayed like that 3 generations, quiet and still. The sun sank slowly, laying a long path of gold across the dock. The smell of salt, damp wood and the faint scent of tea drifting from the porch blended into something you couldn't name, only feel. Clayton leaned forward, fingertips grazing the water. "I don't know if Mom can hear me," he said, "but I hope she knows I'm trying to fix things." I looked at him. "She never needed you to promise," I said. "She just needed to see you do it." He nodded, eyes wet, but smiling. Above us, a flock of seagulls curved across the orange sky, their white wings cutting through the last line of sun. I leaned back against the wooden post, warmth spreading through my shirt. Noah rested his head on my shoulder. Clayton sat beside us, one hand pressed to the dock. For a moment, the world stopped. Anger had passed. Hurt had quieted. All that remained was the evening light, the sound of the river, and 3 faces turned toward the same horizon. Through the open doorway, Ellie's photograph caught the glow of sunset. The reflection turned her smile almost real, soft, alive, forgiving. And in that smile, our story finally ended, not with victory, but with peace. Autumn wind carried the scent of dry leaves and river salt curling around the porch of the Wilmington cabin. I woke before the clock, listening to the soft slap of water against the dock, like an old friend knocking on the door. October air was clear and high, the kind that cools the skin and sharpens memory. It made me think of the nights I used to drive freight runs past Savannah Young, half wild, and certain the road would never end. Down the hill, the old Ford F-150 sat where I'd left it. The silver paint, dulled by years, caught the morning light, just enough to show its scars, lines of use that no polish could hide. I'd tuned her up last week, cleaned the intake, replaced the filters, tightened the ignition. The engine purred now, steady and proud, like something that still knew its purpose. Gravel crunched outside. Noah came running up the path, a dark wool cap pulled low shoes wet with dew, a small cardboard box tied with red string in his arms. Behind him, Vanessa walked slower, carrying a basket with a milk bottle and folded cloths. Noah set the box on the porch table, talking fast, his voice bright and full of air. His mother had baked a new pumpkin pecan waffle loaf, still warm from the oven. I opened the box and let the steam rise. The smell of butter, cinnamon, and pumpkin filled the porch like a memory you could taste. Vanessa stood at the steps, her smile small but unguarded, something softer than it used to be. She said the kitchen opened early this morning for her fall recipe shoot, and she wanted to bring me a thank you she hadn't known how to say. We sat down at the old table. Noah pulled a drawing from his backpack, the red truck crossing the Talmadge Bridge, a streak of gold water beneath it. "I added a coffee stand this time," he said, "so you remember to get coffee when the sun comes up." I laughed, smoothing the paper so it wouldn't fly off in the breeze. Vanessa poured milk into 2 small glasses, set one before Noah, then looked at my hands, still rough from tightening bolts the night before. Does it still hurt when the weather changes? She asked. Less than before, I said. The ache comes and goes with the wind. She nodded, relief slipping into her face, and stepped aside so Noah could sit closer to me. The phone buzzed on the table, a small, insistent sound. Clayton calling on schedule. I put it on speaker so Noah could hear his father's voice. Clayton's tone was calm, steady, the kind a man learns after falling hard and standing up again. He said the company had regained 2 northern contracts after the inspection cleared. The Savannah warehouse had tested the new scanning software overnight, without issues, and the drivers wanted to shift departure hours to avoid Monday traffic. He wasn't asking for permission anymore, just advice. Run it for 2 weeks, I said. Track the numbers, keep payroll on time, and don't cut warehouse hours until you've got a plan, Noah chimed in. Dad, you should give the drivers Mom's pumpkin cookies. A short laugh came through the line. Then Clayton said, That's a good idea. I'll tell her. The call ended the way it always did, 3 clear words. See you Friday. The sound lingered round and whole like a closing note that didn't need echo. Noah tugged my sleeve, wanting to go down to the dock. We took the narrow trail through wet grass and under oaks shedding gold like loose coins. Vanessa stayed on the porch, laptop open, working on her autumn menu schedule. Every now and then she looked up, her eyes quiet now, no longer searching for escape. Maybe she finally believed this house could hold her steady. Down at the dock, the river was so clear we could see the reflections of the neighbor kids biking along the far path, their outlines rippling and straightening with each small wave. Noah dropped a copper-colored leaf into the water and watched it drift. Leaves can go far, he said, because the water knows how to make room. By mid-afternoon, I went back to make more coffee. Vanessa wrapped the leftover loaf in paper and tied it neatly. She asked if I wanted her to ride along tomorrow when I drove into Savannah. I told her I wanted to watch the sunrise alone, but that Saturday evening, they should all come back for dinner. I'd grill the fish, and the pumpkin loaf could be dessert. She smiled, texted Clayton, and helped Noah into his jacket as the river wind began to cool. That night, I lit the small lamp beneath the wedding photograph on the wall. Ellie's smile glowed in the amber light, and for the first time in a long while the house felt entirely whole. In the quiet, her voice came back not as memory, but as truth. Justice isn't about winning, it's about everyone finally learning to listen. And now they did. Clayton asked before acting. Vanessa said thank you before recording. Noah understood that listening stood at the start of every kind of respect. I didn't need more than that. I thought about Friday's call, Saturday's dinner, the way Vanessa would tie the ribbon around another loaf, the way Noah's next drawing might have a small boat anchored under the dock. I smiled not because I'd won anything, but because at last everyone was listening. Thank you for staying till the end. If you believe that peace is the gentlest form of justice, share this story. Like, subscribe, and let the next one find its way home to you.